Welcome to episode 14. I'm Jody.
And I'm Mari.
And today, since we have not gone over a natal birth chart yet, on video especially, and in honor of Sagittarius season, we have chosen to go over Miley Cyrus's natal birth chart.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this because, as you said, we haven't given a demonstration of what, reading a natal chart really looks like. So, and that's something that I don't find when I've looked for other YouTube videos, etc. The actual breakdown of how this looks when you're going over a chart with a client. So this is going to be fun. And as Jody said too, this is our first video. So we actually have the chart up on YouTube. But for those of you who are listening on Apple Podcasts or any of the other streaming platforms that are audio, we will link her chart. So you can pull up the chart and follow along with us as we go. So I'm going to jump in right away first and start talking about the nodal story, because from an evolutionary astrology perspective, which is where I come from primarily, that is normally where I start with a client because it is the soul story. And everything else in a way sort of ties into that and plays into the whole story of what your soul has chosen. But that's the core for me, coming from the perspective that I'm coming from. So I'm going to start there. And as you can see, we have the South Node in Gemini in the first house and the North Node in Sagittarius in the seventh house for Miley. So we talk about the South Node as the energy that you're coming into this life with. It's your internal operating system. And from the evolutionary astrology perspective and much of astrology, we do believe in reincarnation. We believe in multiple lives, that we come to this earth school and that we are trying to experience it all and learn it all before we graduate out of earth school. And so if you're coming in with a lot of one energy, the North Node is what your soul has chosen for this lifetime to move towards, to experience more of that energy and bring more of that energy, which is its polarity. It's its opposite. So it feels foreign to us often when we're younger, and our sort of knee-jerk reactions are more based around our South Node when we're younger. And we sort of slowly move towards that North Node as we hear that subtle whisper of our soul. And whether you ever know about astrology or not, I always say this is happening energetically in the background of your life. And so you will see, as we look at Miley's chart today, you will see this story unfolding because we know a lot about her just because she's lived her life in such a public way. And you will see the story unfolding in her chart. So with a South Node in Gemini in the first house, she really comes in as a shapeshifter, someone who survived through adaptability, quick wit, and constantly reading the environment. There's an ability to become whatever is needed with Gemini, especially in the first, the house of self, literally who she is, right? So Gemini in the first is, I become whoever the moment needs. This can create a fragmented sense of self or multiple personas and an ability to adapt to what she thinks is being asked of her. So she may have learned to stay safe by staying interesting, clever, funny, provocative, or always changing. And the ruler of her South Node is Mercury, which is over in Scorpio. And there's a little Scorpio stellium there with the 3 planets in Scorpio, which tells us more about her past lives and the energy she's coming in with. So she arrives with psychological insight, really intense and possibly obsessive tendencies, penetrating mind, and also a tendency to overwork, overfocus, overanalyze. And there's deep inner shadows driving her self-perception. I would talk about this as a past life lived, typically a young person when we're thinking about Mercury as the ruler, who went through some really intense and probably difficult things. And that adaptability that we're talking about with Gemini came as a survival mechanism. I have to morph into whatever is needed in order to survive. Some gifts, though, that she's brought in from the past would be incredible comedic timing, quick mind, quick voice, imaginative creativity, and a natural storyteller gift comes often with Gemini, which I think we can really see all of those things play out again in her career, and the ability to experiment, play, and reinvent herself. But the shadow sides of that can be feeling scattered or unanchored and confusing her identity with her performance, or over-identifying with labels, trends, the characters that she's embodying, and imposter syndrome masked by bravado, right? Not ever really knowing who she is on a deep level because she's trying to play all of these different characters. So imposter syndrome is when we don't feel like we really embody that which we are putting out in the world. So yeah, and not feeling like she truly has enough information to have real authority. Often with Gemini as a South Node, there's a sense of, I don't have enough information yet. I don't have the mastery that Sagittarius would have, mastery over a subject in order to be the authority on this subject. And so looking to others to sort of tell her what to do, where to go, etc. And, you think of her as a child actor and probably just taking direction and trying to morph into whatever anybody needed her to be and wanted her to be. And then there is a sextile from Chiron in Leo to the South Node, which tells us that she comes in already carrying a wound around being seen at home or in her family lineage. There's also possibly an intergenerational wound around her authenticity, love, and belonging. So kind of the idea of, I learned to perform love rather than simply receive it, trying to please. And that ties in directly with that South Node. So the North Node in Sagittarius is her soul trying to move towards authenticity, truth, big picture thinking, higher wisdom and meaning, mastery, like I said, freedom through honesty with herself and others, specifically being in the 7th house of relationship, and partnerships that expand her. A lot of her life lessons come through partnerships, whether that be romantic or close friends, or even people that she works with. That's a partnership if she's in a working relationship with them. So relationships are a huge part of her learning in this life. And that theme comes up multiple other times as well. And spirituality as a guiding light towards meaning and purpose, because that Gemini South Node can get a little lost and be sort of unsure where to point and where true north is. And that Sagittarius has a very clear idea of what meaning is and what purpose is. And then the ruler of her North Node is Jupiter in Libra in the 5th house. So with that adds the themes of, how is she going to move towards that? Well, through creativity, art, romance, play, beauty, learning fairness and balance, relationship, and letting love and relationships be a teacher for her. So this lifetime is about choosing truth over personas, choosing authenticity over shape-shifting into others' expectations, and choosing relationships that reflect who she really is. Relationships serving as a mirror for her soul growth. We talk about the 7th house as the relationships that really mirror who we are back to us so that we learn more about ourselves. And that's really a lot of her North Node story. And then again, an aspect to the North Node, it's trine Chiron and Leo. So healing comes through seeing and naming her truth, especially in relationships, love, and her family patterns, like really owning who she is with her family too, and saying, this is the direction I'm heading. This is what I'm doing. I love you, but I'm not just going to follow whatever it is that you expect of me. So when she speaks truth from her heart, she breaks ancestral patterns. So ultimately, her story is moving from, I'll become whoever you need me to be, into, I will show you who I truly am. And from fragmentation, performance, survival through adaptability, to truth, authenticity, wisdom, and meaningful relationships. From constant reinvention to a cohesive, spiritually aligned identity. And really, I think that's why Miley's life has been one dramatic identity cycle after another. It's not a publicity stunt. It's evolutionary astrology. It's her living out on the public stage this story.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's played out in what we've been able to see as the spectators in her life as a child actor up till now. And she has completely changed.
Yeah.
Evolved into her true self. So seems like she is definitely doing that North Node work.
Yeah. And as far as spirituality goes, one of my spiritual teachers that I follow and love, she's really good friends with. I've seen them post pictures together. So she is moving into a spiritual world and exploring that for herself, which is very Sagittarius through her relationships as well. And I think in her interviews, recent interviews that I listened to as well, there's a real sense of feeling grounded in who she is now. And she even spoke to the fact that she is no longer living through others' expectations. I mean, she may not have said that in those exact words, but that was the vibe. Like, she has a much more grounded, settled, peaceful presence about her now than she did when she's been through a lot.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about her big three. Her rising sign is Taurus, which she does come across very earthy, very grounded, steady. It's ruled by Venus. So to me, that Taurus rising ruled by Venus, and then she has that Jupiter in Libra, that is where she gets her amazing style. I mean, think of all the outfits that she's worn. And she just has her own style, beauty.
Yeah.
She doesn't wear, the typical thing. She's always coming up with some very unique and different outfit.
And I think too, with a Taurus rising, you think of someone who appears, like you said, grounded and grounding and calming to others when it's that the presence of that. Usually someone beautiful, sensuality is really kind of woven into a Taurus rising. And like a kind of a slowness and all of that calm grounding is sort of like covering all of the inner chaos that she has carried.
Yeah.
And ultimately we'll get into some of her other placements. Like internally, what she is showing outwardly is, at least upon first appearance, we talk about rising as first appearance, is not at all probably what's happening internally. But I also think it's interesting, Taurus rising speaks to a voice rooted in the body, which even her voice, that deep rasp in her voice is very earthy, right? And her body language speaks loudly as well. With a Taurus rising, you're looking at body language as speaking almost first and foremost before she opens her mouth, because it's so body oriented, and that's the first appearance.
Yeah. And ruled by Venus, like she always looks amazing. She always looks great style.
Very beautiful.
Unique.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, next we already know she's a Sagittarius sun. So this gives her a little bit wild, untamed, truth-telling, fire self. That is definitely how she comes across, and that is her sun sign. So that is how she shines in the world. That's her personality. She's bold, she's spontaneous, rebellious. That isn't much secret. And really impossible to box in, because she is her own authentic, unique self, and she is not afraid to show that.
Yeah. And if you look at the degrees, that sun is actually conjunct the Scorpio stellium as well. So this adds way more intensity and depth to that already wild Sagittarius, and like you said, that's the rebel truth teller archetype, and someone who is really speaking from their deep psyche as well, because Mercury is right there in Scorpio. And then there's the opposition to the Taurus rising. So it's kind of a built-in contradiction. It's like a good girl, wild girl split, right? There's the appearance of the good girl and the grounded, calming presence, but then she opens her mouth and wild girl comes out.
Yeah.
So it really is kind of this tug of war between, Taurus is the stable homebody, and then Sagittarius is radical freedom. And that's a real push-pull energy between those two, for sure.
Yeah. And then she has her moon in Scorpio, which is very deep and intense. I mean, Scorpio is a water sign. So has that emotional intensity. And people with Scorpio moons feel very, very deeply. She has this fun-loving, outgoing sun sign, and then she has this very intense, deep Scorpio moon.
Mm-hmm. Which also leads her or draws her to what is raw, taboo, and transformative, right? And that has come through. That Scorpio has really come through. And she's got Pluto right there. It's Mercury, her voice, and the way she communicates, her emotions, her inner world, her intuition, and Pluto in Scorpio, it's the sign that it rules, all piled together there. That is intense. And it is, Scorpio often brings about talking about that which makes people uncomfortable sometimes. Or, there's been some moments. I mean, I think we all remember a certain concert that made everyone very uncomfortable. Wrecking Ball made some people uncomfortable. There were moments where she went, listen, I may have been this character that I was playing when I was younger, on Disney, and, this cutesy little character. But this has been inside of me all along. And I'm about to show you who I really am. And it's intense and deep. And but she transforms through her emotional cycles. Her transformation comes through these emotional cycles and these things that she's gone through. And she processes those feelings through doing, and work becomes an emotional release. It comes out in her work. It's in the 6th house. So the way in which she works has to have this transformative depth and emotion to it. There's really no way around it. So it's going to come out in her work. And she needs consistent routines to feel grounded. Too much stress, chaos, or overworking can lead to emotional overwhelm. But there's a tendency to do that with all of that Scorpio. So that's something that she's learning to balance in this life as well, is the work balance. Because when she's feeling all of those things, the tendency can be to just throw herself into work and let that be the alchemy. But the balance is key there, or you can really burn yourself out.
Yeah, and with that, well, Scorpio Moon, but even that whole stellium in Scorpio, I mean, she is an all or nothing person. Scorpio Moon typically is looking for that emotional honesty from people. And Scorpio is like the Phoenix Rising. So you burn it down and it will rise again. And she has done that many times.
Many times.
Career of already. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, there's an echo of career longevity, and we'll get to that. But the Saturn in the 10th house, we'll get to that in a minute. But I was going to say, too, adding to all of this intensity there is a square aspect, which is the tension aspect between that stellium and, again, that Chiron in the 4th house. Her Chiron plays a pretty pivotal role in her story. The wound around family, belonging, being loved for who she is, feeling like she has to perform, or even shock in order to be seen, and core vulnerability that drives her creativity. A lot of that, I think, comes from that internal wound around Chiron. Yeah, and if we look at her Pluto specifically, because from an evolutionary astrology perspective too, we look at the outer planets as these big life lessons that we sign up for that tie into our natal story as well. And Pluto is one of our biggest ones around transformation, what we have to move through and transform. And so for her Pluto in the 6th house in Scorpio is around purifying instead of self-punishing. Her default pattern is to use work as a coping mechanism, like I said, and her lesson is to use it consciously, not compulsively. So to heal through routine and to understand that her power is her truth-telling. So Scorpio Pluto in the 6th gives her the ability to shape-shift the culture through how she works and how she expresses emotional truth, and transforming her pain into service, because she exposes her shadows publicly so others feel less alone. And that's not an accident. It's the contract. That's part of what she signed up for, to, in a public way, show this pattern so others could resonate with it as well. Yeah. So later in life, that Pluto, as she's healing and moving through that Pluto, instead of chaotic reinvention, she becomes intentional about her evolution.
Yeah. She's really wired for reinvention and shadow work, which she seems to be doing. I saw her on one interview where she was like, ask me anything. So she's pretty open about anything that she gets asked about. She's a pretty open person. I think she is here to kind of break those taboos, and she's here to be her authentic, rebellious self.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have her Mercury myself. Her Mercury is right on top of mine. I have a 28-degree Mercury in Scorpio. So we are 1 degree apart. And
is yours retrograde? I forget.
It is not. It is not. Okay. But I'm pretty much an open book. I'm willing to talk about anything. And I prefer to talk about what others won't, because I think it's important. That's Scorpio. Scorpio thinks it's important to talk about the things that are taboo. And Scorpio also goes, why is everyone uncomfortable? Right. Like, and I find myself in situations like that sometimes where I'm diving deep and I'm going into something and I say something shocking, but I don't say it for shock value. I don't even know it's going to be shocking until I see people's faces.
Right.
Oh, we don't talk about that. Okay. So I relate to that, being willing to talk about anything, like in an interview, as she does, to say, ask me anything. That's such a Scorpio Mercury thing.
Yeah. And then Pluto right there too. So like those deep, intense conversations, she's very open to.
Mm-hmm. And that moon, her emotions coming through lend a level of authenticity, I think, to when she opens up like that. Because you feel the truth of what she's saying coming through, I believe, when she's really speaking about things like that. You know that she's telling the truth because I think her emotions back it up, which really lends that authenticity to it. And then if we go from there, we can see that her Mars in Cancer in the 3rd house trines all of that. We talked about her sun and her moon in that Scorpio stellium. There is a trine, which is a flowing energy to that Mars in the third house. And I think that has so much to do with her voice and her career, the third house being communication, and Mars, what drives us. And Cancer, it rules the moon. So there's an emotional tie into that as well. So just like the building blocks of it, Mars and Cancer in the third house is protective, loyal, sometimes reactive. It can be emotionally driven speech, like I said, which ties into her moon, Mercury as well. Sometimes anger can come through the voice. So really speaking your mind, and with being a Sagittarius, probably speaking without thinking sometimes. That may have gotten her in trouble a time or two in her life. If I had to guess, it can be guarded. Mars and Cancer can be guarded, but it's very protective of those that it loves.
But Mars isn't comfortable in Cancer because you have fiery Mars in watery Cancer, and it's just not typically comfortable there.
Right. So it has to find an outlet to express for her. It's not a particularly comfortable placement, but it has to be expressed because it's in the third house. So she has to find a way to channel that. And for her, it flows through all of that Scorpio and her sun with that trining energy. And I think that amplifies her emotional expression. It lends to her artistic fire and emotional authenticity. I think she really fights for what she cares about and speaks up about what she cares about because of that Mars as well.
And singing.
Yeah, absolutely. That all ties into her career because her drive is around her voice, right? Mars drive, third house communication, emotion built in. So that's going to come through in everything that she sings and the songs that she writes, for sure. Yeah, and she already has that natural storyteller ability that just amplifies all of that. And then if we go and move up to her Capricorn stellium, because she has 2 stellium, a stellium being 3 or more. There is an argument amongst astrologers whether it's 4 or more or 3 or more planets in a sign or house, but Jody and I both call 3 or more a stellium. So 3 planets in Capricorn up in the 8th and 9th as we're looking at the Placidus house system. The themes around that stellium have a lot to do with relationship for her because it's in the 8th house, which is deep, intimate relationship, and her Venus is there, which is all about relationship. So again, this little stellium, I think, really ties into her nodal story because her North Node in the 7th house of partnership has many of her life lessons come through a relationship. As a Venus in Capricorn, she takes love seriously, like wants something long term, but also needs emotional freedom with Uranus on top of it, and also has romantic idealism with Neptune, right? So she's looking for kind of the perfect relationship, and I think that's why it's such a transformational, great teacher for her. And again, Miley and I have a bit in common because I also have Venus in Capricorn, conjunct Neptune. My Uranus is in Sagittarius because I was born a few years earlier than her, so it hadn't moved into Capricorn yet. But the idealism of relationship and that Venus-Neptune is really relationship as a spiritual experience and a teacher. But looking for something lasting with Capricorn, if you have a Venus in Capricorn, you are often looking for something long term. You want to build something with someone else, and you're looking for your forever person. But when you put Neptune on top of it, and then Uranus as well, and her Sagittarius already that freedom-loving, rebellious spirit, she's going to need someone who allows her full freedom, appreciates her for who she is, but is there as that stable, Capricorn foundation as well, and can lead her to that spiritual element of Neptune, which is also woven into the spirituality of North Node Sagittarius, because Jupiter and Neptune both speak to spirituality and religion. And so I think that whole thing really ties into relationships for her as catalyst and teacher in her life.
And non-conventional. I mean, when I see Uranus next to Venus like that, a lot of times is that indicator. And Miley's been very open publicly about her sexuality. So just non-conventional, but yet it's in Capricorn. So there are some rules there.
Right. Which I imagine probably creates some sort of an inner conflict. Right. Because my guess would be she is probably a sexual person, someone who expresses themselves in love through her sexuality because of the Scorpio stellium 1 and her Venus and Uranus in the 8th house.
Jupiter in the 5th house.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, and even, some taboo being woven into that with all of that Scorpio and then the 8th house tie. But that Capricorn energy, like I said, is looking for something lasting. And then there's the spiritual woven aspect of sort of higher meaning through relationships. So it's complex. Her relationship life, I imagine, has been very complex. You know, and we've watched her get married and divorced, and there's been a few public relationships that have been, I think, catalysts for her, for sure.
Yeah, and Liam is a Capricorn. That puts another layer of...
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. So
Yeah, why the draw was there, for sure. We could probably do a whole other episode just looking at their charts together.
Oh, yes. I think so.
See what we could see around what went well and what drew them together, and maybe where things fell apart, even possibly as well. All speculation, of course, but it's fun to look at those things.
It is.
And then briefly, just to touch on the Neptune and Uranus kind of separate from the stellium. Neptune in Capricorn is her soul level intention to rebuild her belief system from the ground up, right? Neptune in Capricorn comes from a generational wound of where does meaning come from when the world's structures fail? Because Capricorn is traditional structure. And when that falls apart, which we've seen some of over the past 14 years with Pluto and moving through Capricorn, we've seen some of what was pulled up from the shadow of the old structure ways and went, oh, this isn't working anymore. So with Neptune in Capricorn, her spiritual life cannot be outsourced to institutions, meaning she has to find her own path. She can't inherit it. And that's true of many of the, that's true of that generation of Neptune Capricorn. They're learning through their own experience versus what they were told from structured religion. And art is her spiritual language. So she channels intuition, symbolism, and soulful truth through music and performance because that Venus and her artistry are tied in there as well. And then Uranus is her soul level intention to break ancestral patterns around power, sex, money, and emotional intensity in that 8th house. So Uranus is liberation. Capricorn is lineage, tradition, father figures, rules. 8th house is trauma, intimacy, inheritance, and shared energy. So no one gets to own her. 8th house Uranus rebels against emotional, financial, and psychological entanglement. So freedom and intimacy for her is a non-negotiable. And she's a cycle breaker. With Uranus in the 8th, it's almost always born into a family with emotional secrets, intergenerational trauma, rigid expectations, power imbalances. And she's here to end the cycle, not repeat it. So authenticity really is her liberation when it comes to that Uranus.
Yeah. She also talks about being bullied in school. I would probably look at the 3rd house for that. I'm not sure what you would look at for that, but
I could definitely see that. And again, when you see Mars and Cancer there's this probably holding things in. She's got all that Gemini South node where she's trying to be what everybody needs her to be, wants her to be, probably trying to be popular because everyone's ultimately trying to be popular simply for the sake of fitting in when you're a kid, because tribe means safety. So from a primal instinctual place, we try to fit in, right? So popularity would mean I'm part of this. I fit in here. But that Cancer, Mars, is someone who is probably also in a way reserved or guarded in some ways. But my guess is if she were bullied, she would take a lot, and then one day snap.
Yeah.
To me, that's Mars and Cancer. Like you stay quiet, you keep it shoved down, you just put your head down. And then one day you go, enough. So I definitely could see that pattern happening for her, for sure. Yeah. And she's all of that other intensity with the Scorpio and the Sagittarius and the 8th house stuff where she would just go, right?
Eventually.
As you mature into those things, right? Because that's all internal, but her external operating system is Taurus. And then the knee-jerk reaction of Gemini, like pleasing others and being that calming presence. But all of that, what's inside, is eventually going to come out.
Yeah. And then with her father being famous, kids can be very mean. I mean,
Yeah. And especially if they're actually jealous, right? If you have a famous father, there's probably jealousy there, but that's not the way it comes out. It comes out as I'm going to be cruel and make fun of this maybe because it's actually something I secretly want, because that's what we do when we are acting out of our sort of base level instincts, which kids are learning to move through, right? So, and with the Chiron being in the 4th house in Leo, is she able to express herself as herself, or is she overshadowed by the family? Right? My family is bothering. Yeah. And then if we go all the layers. Oh my gosh, I know. The more I studied her chart, the more I just thought this is so perfect for her. And because she's lived so much of her life on a public stage, we really are able to to see it so clearly. Yeah, this one was fun for sure. And then kind of wrapping up, we have her midheaven in Aquarius and Saturn, and then we'll kind of tie in the Jupiter and Libra, which sort of ties into that same story. A midheaven in Aquarius, straight off the bat, is someone who is a rebel in the public persona in a way, right? Not afraid to just be her wild self out in the world, in her career, in the public eye. And almost that being her legacy. We talk about Saturn and the 10th house as legacy. So reinvention is part of her brand, a career shaped by freedom and originality. This also is where I was going to talk about the fact that her career, though it may have had many Phoenix moments, with Saturn in the 10th, odds are she will have a long career and with many reinventions of self. She started as a child actress, but I see her career being long and successful with that Saturn there, right on the midheaven. And the trine to Jupiter makes her a natural entertainer. And I think the soul level intention of Saturn in Aquarius in the 10th would be to leave a legacy of radical authenticity, purpose, and service to the collective. Saturn in Aquarius is the architect of the future, the wise rebel, the structured visionary. And that's a major soul contract for her. Saturn is another one of our big soul contracts that we sign. Her rebellion has to be purposeful, not reactive. Saturn in Aquarius wants her to grow from I'll break the rules just because towards I'll break the rules when they need breaking in order to teach or to show the way for the collective. Because Aquarius is kind of futuristic. It's the foresight showing us the way where we're headed as a collective for healing. And that Libra trine flowing energy from the 5th house is big creativity, big love energy, charm, charisma, like a true performer's blessing, right? That Jupiter in the 5th in Libra, for sure.
One thing I wanted to mention too is so typically looking at a chart, I have a few things on my checklist that I do, like the sun, the moon, the rising, the Saturn, and then Saturn returns. And looking at Miley's Saturn return, I think it was very pleasant, actually. I mean, she has had a lot of ups and downs in her life for sure, but I don't think her Saturn return was one of them, which is a little bit unique. I mean, typically Saturn returns kind of shake things up. So she was one of the luckier people with her Saturn return because I think that it was something more beneficial to her. Her career was going very well. And a few years later, her marriage ended, I believe. Yeah, because her marriage ended in 2020, was it? I think 2020.
Well, she, again, much like me, I didn't realize how many similarities we had, but she had a lot of her really difficult Pluto transits in her early life. If you look at where Pluto is, Pluto would move over, as it's transiting, would move over the rest of her Scorpio stellium, moved through Sagittarius, and moved through, as it was moving through Capricorn, moved over that stellium as well. And by her Saturn return, I imagine I would think still in Capricorn, if I remember, because her Saturn return would have been, she's 5 years younger than me, probably still in Capricorn, but I imagine it would have been had moved past that area. So kind of coming out of a lot of really difficult Pluto conjunctions, moving over her deeply personal planets and things, all piled in her early years, which means that she went through a lot of transformation young, so that by the time she reached that Saturn return, I think probably a lot of maturity had already been had been learned. She's lived a lot of life even before that age of 29, 30.
Yeah. And she did have voice surgery back in 2019. So I thought that was interesting too. And again, we could go look at all of these transits on her chart and make this podcast many hours long.
So much longer. I know. I had so many notes and tried to keep it as brief as possible. Because a natal chart reading with me usually goes 2 hours at least. And there's so much more we can dig into, but
right. And she's so interesting. And I love the example of how charts can play out in so many different ways. It's not black and white. One thing that stood out to me for her chart is if I looked at her chart without knowing anything about her, I might look at her moon and think that, maybe she struggled with her relationship with her mother. And Actually, she'll tell you that she is the most close with her mother, and that she loves her mother, and her and her mother are very close. And she talks about how when she had to go out on the road by herself without her mother at 33 years old, and how hard that was for her. So it's just really
Right. When you see a Scorpio moon with Pluto there, you would have a tendency to think that could be an intense and possibly tumultuous relationship.
Yeah.
But that just goes to show that we don't have her mom's chart. And really, there are these sort of overarching themes that you see, but it's kind of like sun sign astrology. They're generalized.
Right.
Your horoscope, if you look at your horoscope, it's very generalized. And sometimes it doesn't resonate at all because that horoscope doesn't know your specific chart. And if we were to take Miley's mom's chart and her chart and run a synastry, we might see something very different. We might be able to see why that bond is so close and why her and her mom have been stuck like glue, and that she's that grounding force in her life. Because I heard her talk about that as well in an interview. And yeah, it's not what you would typically think of with those placements when we associate the moon and then Pluto and Scorpio.
Right.
Well, this was fun. I'm so glad that we decided to do a natal chart interpretation. It's just fun to see it demonstrated, I think. And that was when I was early learning in astrology, that was something that I was looking for more of, to be able to follow along and sort of piece all these separate things together.
Yeah.
That's the true art, I think, of astrology, is taking all of these bits of information and then weaving a story.
Right. Like the why in the chart to help us understand the whole story of everything. And thank goodness for famous people like Miley Cyrus, because we can look at these charts and kind of validate a lot of them, because her whole life is out in the
On display.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just goes to show you how much you can really see in the chart that reflects your life. So much fun to go through them.
So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for checking out our first video podcast. And again, the chart will be linked for spaces where there is not video content, so you can follow along with the visual. It really helps.
Yeah, thank you. And be sure to like and share our podcasts so that they can subscribe. Thank you. I was like, I know I'm missing something.
And if you can on YouTube, all of those things help us to reach more people. If you ever have any questions or episode suggestions, please feel free to reach out. Our email is always listed in the episode show notes.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.